He hadn't even stepped off the church porch when she pulled her hand back and said, "If this is a favor, you can leave now." So why did he stay? Garrett still had dust on his boots when the preacher cleared his throat and the paper hit the table between them. Outside, a wagon wheel creaked and someone laughed too loud, like this was a joke meant for the whole town. Lillian didn't look at the crowd. She looked at him, steady, unflinching, like she was measuring whether he'd stand or walk away like the rest. Garrett didn't reach for her. Didn't speak. Just stood there, knowing one wrong step would cost more than the promise he'd made. So what would you have done? Kept your word? Or turned around before it became something real? The wind never stopped in Red Mesa. It came down the ridges like it had somewhere to be, cutting through coat and bone the same way. Garrett Cole drove the shovel into the frozen ground and felt it bite back. He didn't rush. There was no one to hurry for. Behind him, the low hill rolled into scrub and rock. The sky stretched wide and pale. A single horse stood tied to a mesquite post, head down, reins rattling softly in the wind. The world had gone quiet in that way it does after something ends. Garrett leaned on the shovel for a moment, catching his breath. His hands were raw, knuckles split from the cold and the work. He glanced over his shoulder. Thomas Hale lay wrapped in a canvas tarp, boots still on, hat resting over his chest. Didn't look like much now. Just a shape. Just a weight. A few nights earlier, Thomas had still been talking. "Colt," he'd rasped, voice thin as paper. Garrett had sat beside him inside the cattle shelter, the lantern throwing a weak circle of light. The air had smelled of kerosene and sickness. Snow hammered the walls like it meant to break in. "I'm here," Garrett said. Thomas coughed, turned his head slow. "You always say that." Garrett didn't answer. Thomas's hand had searched blindly until Garrett caught it. The grip was weak, but it held. "There's a woman," Thomas said. Garrett frowned. In all their years riding together, Thomas never spoke much about anything beyond cattle, weather, and the next job. "A woman?" Garrett said. "Sanvera," Thomas breathed. "Name's Lillian Brooks." Garrett waited. "I told her." Thomas swallowed hard. "If things got bad, I'd come for her, marry her, give her a place that's steady." The wind outside had howled louder, like it was listening. Garrett shook his head. "You never mentioned her." "Didn't matter before." Thomas's eyes found his. "Matters now." Garrett felt something tighten in his chest. "You'll tell her yourself." Thomas didn't smile. "No, I won't." Silence sat between them. "Garrett," he said, voice barely there now, "you owe me one." Garrett looked away. He remembered a frozen river, a boy too small to know better, a hand grabbing him before the current took him under for good. "I remember," Garrett said. "Then do this for me." Thomas's fingers curled weakly. "Go to her. Don't let her stand alone in a place that don't care if she falls." Garrett didn't answer right away. Marriage wasn't something he'd ever planned. He'd watched men change under it, watched them get tied up in things that pulled their eyes off the land, off the work. But Thomas lay there, already halfway gone. "You want me to marry a stranger," Garrett said flat. "I want you to keep a promise I can't." The lantern flickered. Garrett exhaled slowly. "Does she even know you'd ask this?" "I wrote her." Thomas's eyes closed for a second. "Box, under my bedroll." Garrett reached back, found the small wooden box. It was heavier than it looked. "Everything's in there," Thomas whispered. "Letter, address." Garrett held it in both hands. The wood was smooth from years of use. "You don't have to love her," Thomas said. "Just don't stand in her way." Garrett stared at him. That I can do, he said. Thomas nodded once. Then his grip loosened. By morning, he was gone. Now, Garrett dropped another shovel of dirt into the grave. The sound was dull, final. He worked until the hole was filled, until the ground sat flat again, with a small rise of stones marking it. No prayer, no words, just the wind. He stood there a long time after. Then he picked up the box, mounted his horse, and rode. Sanvera sat tucked between two ridges, dust lining the main street like it had settled there years ago and never moved. Garrett rode in slow, the town barely noticing him. A man his size usually drew eyes. Today, he didn't care. He tied his horse outside a narrow storefront with a faded sign, Brooks Sewing. Through the window, he saw her, head bent over a table, sleeves rolled, needle flashing in steady rhythm. Garrett stood there a moment, hat in hand. Then he pushed the door open. A small bell rang. She didn't look up right away. Finished her stitch. Cut the thread clean. Only then did she turn. Lillian Brooks. Older than the photograph he'd seen. The scar still there, pale against her skin, running from temple to jaw. Not hidden, not softened. Her eyes met his. Gray. Steady. "Can I help you?" she asked. Garrett stepped forward. "Name's Garrett Cole. I rode in from Red Mesa." Nothing changed in her expression. "I knew Thomas Hale," he added. That did it. A flicker. Small, but there. "Did," she repeated. Garrett nodded once. "He passed 3 weeks ago." Silence filled the room. She didn't cry, didn't ask how, just stood there, hands resting on the table. "I brought this," Garrett said, pulling the letter from his coat. She took it without touching his hand, didn't open it. "Thank you for bringing it," she said. Garrett shifted his weight. The words he'd rehearsed felt useless now. "He asked me to come," he said. "Said I was to marry you in his place." The bell above the door swayed slightly, though no one had entered. Lillian let out a quiet breath. Not surprise. Something closer to tired recognition. "Of course he did," she said. She turned away, walked to the window. The street outside moved on like nothing had changed. "You can go back," she said without looking at him. "Whatever promise he thought he made doesn't bind you." Garrett stayed where he was. "He saved my life," he said. "That counts for something." She turned then, eyes sharper. "Is that what this is?" she asked. "A debt?" Garrett didn't answer. Lillian studied him for a long moment. Then she said, calm and clear, "If you came out of pity, you can turn around." Garrett met her gaze. "I didn't come for pity," he said. "Then why did you come?" He thought about the storm, the river, the way Thomas had looked at him at the end. "Because I said I would," he answered. Lillian looked down at the letter in her hand. For a moment, the room went still. Then she broke the seal. "Read it slow." Garrett watched her face, waiting for something to change. It didn't. Not in any way he could name. When she finished, she folded the paper carefully, set it on the table. "Well?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked back toward him, stopping just out of reach. "We talk first," she said. Garrett frowned slightly. "No one owns my future," she added. The wind outside rattled the window. Garrett gave a small nod. "Fair enough," he said. She held his gaze, didn't say yes, didn't say no. And somehow, that felt heavier than either. Garrett stayed in Sanvera 4 days. He rented a narrow room above the general store. The bed sagged in the middle. The wash basin chipped along the rim. Every morning he poured cold water over his face, shaved slow, then walked past the same row of storefronts until he reached Brooks Sewing. Lillian never invited him in. He stood by the doorway, hat in hand, while she worked. Sometimes she asked questions. "Where is this ranch of yours?" "North of Red Mesa, edge of the Rock Ridge." "How many acres?" "Enough." She gave him a look at that. "Enough isn't a number, Mr. Cole." He shifted. "Couple hundred fenced. More open land past the creek." She nodded once, went back to stitching. Another day, she asked, "Do you drink?" "Sometimes." "Do you lose your temper?" "Not often." "Do you expect obedience?" Garrett looked at her then. Really looked. "No," he said. That seemed to matter. On the fourth day, she closed the shop early, turned the sign to "Back Tomorrow," though tomorrow wasn't promised. She stood in the doorway, holding a folded paper. "I'll do it," she said. Garrett didn't speak. She stepped down onto the dirt street, boots quiet. "But we set terms," she added. He nodded. "You don't own me," she said. "Not my time, not my work." "All right. I keep sewing. I earn my own money." "Fine. I don't answer to you like a servant." Garrett's jaw tightened slightly. "Wouldn't want you to." She studied him a long moment, as if testing the truth of that. "And this marriage," she said carefully, "is not what most people mean when they say the word." Garrett looked past her, out toward the ridgeline where the sky met dust. "I'm not most people," he said. That was enough. They married the next morning. The church was small, white paint peeling at the corners, a single window letting in thin light. The preacher didn't ask questions, didn't look surprised. He'd seen stranger things. Lillian wore a plain blue dress, sleeves buttoned neat at the wrist. Garrett wore his cleanest shirt, collar stiff from careful washing. When it came time, they stood side by side, hands at their sides. No one reached for the other. "You may kiss," the preacher started. Garrett gave a small nod instead. Lillian nodded back. The moment passed without touch. They signed the paper. Ink scratched across dry parchment. A marriage recorded as quietly as it had begun. Outside, the wind carried dust along the street. They walked to her shop. 2 trunks waited by the door. 1 smaller crate tied with rope. "That's all?" Garrett asked. "That's everything that matters," she said. He loaded the wagon, secured the ropes twice. She locked the door, paused with the key in her hand, then slipped it into her pocket instead of leaving it behind. They didn't speak much on the ride. The road north climbed slow into rough land. Sagebrush, scattered rock, long stretches of nothing. By late afternoon, the ranch came into view. A house built of weathered timber, a barn leaning slightly west, fences patched in places where storms had taken their share. Lillian stepped down from the wagon, looked around, didn't say anything. Garrett carried her trunks inside, set them by the wall. "You take the larger room," he said. She glanced toward the hallway. "And you?" "I've been fine in the smaller one." She didn't argue. That first evening, they ate at the same table. Bread, salt pork, coffee poured into thick tin cups. Garrett ate steady, eyes down. Lillian chewed slower, watching the room, mapping it. "Water?" she asked at one point, standing before he could answer. She filled his cup, didn't spill a drop. He nodded once. After, she washed the plates without being asked. Not as duty, just because they were there. When the lamps went out, they walked separate ways. 2 doors, 2 quiet rooms. The house settled around them, wood creaking in the cooling night. By morning, the routine began. Garrett out before sunrise, boots hitting the porch, gate creaking open. Lillian awake soon after, tying her hair back, setting a kettle on the stove. By the second day, she found the old storage shed behind the barn, dust thick on the floor, broken stool, a workbench scarred with old cuts. She stood in the doorway a long time. Then she went back inside, rolled up her sleeves, and carried out what she needed. By evening, the space had changed, table cleared, tools arranged, fabric folded neat. A place that belonged to her. Word traveled. It always did. By the end of the week, riders slowed when they passed. Glances lingered. A woman alone at that ranch was one thing. A wife who didn't act like one was another. At the trading post, a man laughed too loud, said something about Garrett being led by the nose. Garrett didn't respond, just paid for his supplies and walked out. Later that same day, Duke Rollins rode up. Big man, clean coat, eyes that measured everything twice. "Cole," Duke said, reining in his horse. "Heard you took a wife." Garrett rested one hand on the fence post. "Heard right." Duke glanced toward the shed where Lillian worked, the sound of a needle tapping faint through the open window. "She settling in?" he asked. "She's working." Duke smiled thin. "Funny thing, timing like this. A man takes on new responsibility when debts start catching up." Garrett's expression didn't change. "I don't owe you anything," he said. "Not yet," Duke replied. "But land has a way of changing hands." He tipped his hat, then rode off slow. Garrett watched him go. Didn't move until the dust settled. That night, Lillian noticed. Not what Duke said, but the way Garrett stood a little longer by the fence. The way his hands stayed still when they should have been working. She didn't ask. Just set his plate down in front of him. He ate. She sat across from him. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was holding something. Neither of them named it. Outside, the wind shifted. Winter wasn't far. It came in the night without warning. No slow build. No gentle drop in temperature. Just a hard wind from the north and a sky that closed in like a door being shut. By morning, the ridge was gone, swallowed in white. Garrett stood in the yard, coat pulled tight, watching the horizon disappear. "Too early," he muttered. The cattle were still up along the higher ground. He didn't hesitate. By the time Lillian stepped onto the porch, he already had the saddle cinched. "You're going out?" she asked. He nodded once. "Got to bring them down before it traps them." She looked past him into the blur of snow. "You won't make it back tonight." "No," he said. A pause. She stepped down, boots sinking into the thin layer already gathering. "Take the heavier coat," she said, turning toward the house. He almost refused. Didn't. When she came back, she held it out without a word. Thick wool, patched at the elbow. Their fingers brushed for a second as he took it. "Keep the fire going," he said. "I know how to keep a fire alive," she replied. He gave a short nod, then swung into the saddle. The gate creaked open. Then he was gone into white. By afternoon, the storm had teeth. Wind drove the snow sideways, rattling the shutters, finding every crack in the house. Lillian fed the fire, stacked wood closer to the door, checked the latch twice. The ranch felt bigger without him. Too quiet. She tried to work in the shed, sat at the table, needle in hand. The thread slipped. She set it down. By evening, the world outside was nothing but sound. Wind scraping across the land like it was trying to peel it bare. That's when the knock came. Soft at first. Then again. Harder. Lillian froze. No one should be out in this. She reached for the iron poker by the hearth and moved toward the door. "Who is it?" she called. No answer. Just the wind. Then, small, thin. "Please." She opened the door. Two shapes stood there, half buried in snow. A girl, maybe 10, clutching a smaller boy who could barely stand. Their faces were pale, eyes wide. "Come in," Lillian said immediately. She pulled them inside, shut the door against the storm. The girl stumbled forward, dragging the boy. "We got lost," she said, voice shaking. "Couldn't see the road." Lillian knelt, brushing snow from their coats. "You're safe now," she said. She didn't ask more. Didn't need to. She moved fast. Blankets from the bedroom, boots off, wet clothes peeled away and hung by the fire. She poured water into a pot, added what she had. Beans, a scrap of salt pork, a handful of dried herbs. The boy sat near the hearth, hands stretched toward the flames, trembling. The girl watched everything Lillian did. Careful, measuring. "You got names?" Lillian asked. "Sarah," the girl said. "That's my brother, Eli." Lillian nodded. "You stay close to the fire, Sarah. Keep him awake." She handed them cups when the broth was ready. "Slow," she said. "Sip it." They obeyed. Outside, the storm raged. Far from the ranch, Garrett fought for ground that wouldn't hold. The cattle scattered when the wind hit full force, men shouting, horses panicking. By dusk, there was no herd to guide, just survival. Garrett found a narrow cut in the rock, a shallow overhang that broke the worst of the wind. He tied his horse, crouched low, pulling the heavy coat tight around him. Snow piled at the entrance, sealing them in piece by piece. The cold worked slow, not sharp, just steady. He kept his eyes open. Thought about nothing. Back at the ranch, the fire burned low. Lillian fed it again, stacking the last of the near wood closer. Sarah had fallen asleep, head against the wall. Eli curled beside her. Lillian sat in the chair, poker resting across her knees. The house creaked. The wind howled. She didn't sleep, didn't let herself. The storm broke on the third day. Not all at once, just stopped. The silence felt heavier than the noise. Lillian opened the door. The world had changed. Snow up to the fence line, drifts against the barn. The path gone. She stepped out, boots sinking deep, looked toward the ridge. Nothing moved. She turned back, went inside, fed the children again. Then she waited. By late afternoon, she heard it. Hoofbeats, slow, uneven. She stepped onto the porch. A figure came through the white. Tall in the saddle, shoulders hunched, coat stiff with ice. Garrett. He rode up without a word. Dismounted slow, one hand braced on the saddle. His fingers were red. Raw. He tied the horse, missed the post once before catching it. Lillian watched. Didn't move to him. Didn't speak. He climbed the steps, boots heavy, stopped just inside the door. The warmth hit him like a wall. He stood there, breathing. Then he looked at her, eyes tired, searching. "If I didn't come back," he said, voice rough, "would you have noticed?" The question hung there, not loud, but it filled the room. Lillian didn't answer. She turned, walked to the stove, ladled broth into a cup, came back and set it in his hands. "Eat before you freeze," she said. Garrett looked down at it. Steam rising. He nodded once. Sat. And for the first time since the storm began, the house felt full again. Garrett didn't finish the broth all at once. He held the cup between both hands, letting the heat work its way back into him. His fingers trembled less with each breath. Across the room, the two children slept curled near the fire. He noticed them then. "Who are they?" he asked. "Lost in the storm," Lillian said, adjusting a blanket without looking at him. Found the door before the cold did. Garrett nodded slowly. You kept them alive, he said. I opened the door, she replied. He didn't argue. The next morning came quiet. Snow still deep, but the sky had cleared. Blue stretched wide over the ridge, sharp and cold. By midday, riders came, parents first, desperate, faces tight until they saw their children step out from the house. Relief broke across them in a way words couldn't hold. Garrett stood back, leaning against the fence post, watched. Lillian spoke little, just handed over scarves, checked the children's hands one last time, made sure they could stand steady. The mother tried to press something into her hand. Coins. Lillian closed the woman's fingers back around them. Keep it, she said. Garrett noticed that. Word spread faster this time. Not whispers, not questions. Something else. By the end of the week, a woman rode up with a torn coat draped over her saddle. You the one who does mending? She asked. Lillian nodded. The woman held out the coat. Heard you don't miss a stitch. Lillian took it, ran her fingers along the tear. I'll have it ready tomorrow. The woman blinked. That fast? Yes. She left the coat, came back the next day with 2 more. Then others came. A ranch wife needing hems taken in, a boy with a ripped sleeve, a man who stood awkward at the door, hat in hand, asking if she could fix a work shirt. Lillian worked steady, didn't rush, didn't waste motion. Garrett noticed how the shed light stayed on later each night, so he fixed the door that didn't close right, replaced the broken hinge without saying anything. The next morning, Lillian paused when she pushed it open. Didn't comment, but she left it open longer than usual. Duke returned 2 weeks after the storm, rode in with papers this time. Clean, folded, official looking. Garrett met him by the fence. You got something for me? Garrett asked. Duke smiled thin. Thought you might like to see this. He handed over the papers. Old debt, signed years back. A number that had grown larger than Garrett remembered. Interest, fees, clauses. Garrett's jaw tightened. Don't recall owing you this much. Time changes things, Duke said. Same as land. Garrett folded the paper once. You want the ranch, he said. I want what's owed, Duke replied. They stood there a long moment, wind moving through the fence posts. You got 30 days, Duke added, or we settle it another way. He turned his horse and rode off. Garrett didn't bring it inside right away, left the paper on the table, sat across from it. Lillian walked in after dusk, hands marked with thread and small cuts. She saw it. Didn't ask. Just picked it up, read. Garrett watched her eyes move across the lines. Slow, careful. She set it down. Where did he get this? She asked. Old deal, Garrett said. Didn't think it mattered anymore. It matters now. He nodded once. She picked it up again. This time she didn't read like someone trying to understand. She read like someone looking for something wrong. Her fingers tapped the edge of the page. Once. Twice. Garrett waited. Finally she looked up. This doesn't hold, she said. He frowned. What? She turned the paper toward him, pointing. Date doesn't match the witness line. Signatures written over dried ink. And this, she tapped the margin, this clause was added after. You can see the difference in the hand. Garrett leaned closer. He didn't see it at first. Then he did. Small things, but clear once you knew where to look. You sure? He asked. I've copied enough contracts in my life to know when one's been changed, she said. Her voice stayed calm, not loud, just certain. They rode into town together the next morning. First time since the wedding. People noticed. Garrett walking beside her, not ahead, not behind, beside. At the general store, Duke stood talking with two men. He turned when they stepped in. "Well," he said, "that was quicker than I expected." Lillian didn't wait for Garrett. She walked forward, placed the paper on the counter. "This isn't valid," she said. Duke's smile didn't fade. "You sure about that?" "Yes." A few people turned to watch. Lillian pointed to the lines, same as she had the night before. Didn't rush, didn't raise her voice, just laid it out, piece by piece. Garrett stood a step behind her, hands at his sides, not stepping in, not interrupting. Duke's smile thinned. "You calling me a liar?" he asked. "I'm saying this doesn't hold," Lillian replied, "and you know it." Silence, the kind that draws people closer. Duke looked at Garrett, waiting. Garrett didn't move, didn't speak, just stayed where he was, behind her. Duke let out a slow breath. Then he picked up the paper, folded it, tucked it into his coat. "This isn't over," he said. "No," Lillian replied, "but it's not yours either." Duke walked out. The door shut behind him with a hard sound. They rode back in silence. Not heavy, not strained, just steady. At the gate, Garrett stopped, looked at her. "You could have let me handle that," he said. Lillian adjusted her grip on the reins. "I know," she said. He waited. She met his eyes. "I didn't need you to." A pause. Garrett gave a small nod. Then he opened the gate. And for the first time, it didn't feel like two people holding their ground. It felt like they were standing on the same one. The ranch settled into a quieter rhythm after that. No one spoke about Duke for a while. Didn't need to. Word had spread through San Vera and beyond. Not about the paper, not about the debt, but about the way things had been handled. People remembered who spoke and who didn't. Lillian's shed stayed busy. Bootsteps outside her door from morning until late afternoon. Coats, shirts, blankets needing mending. Sometimes people stayed longer than they had to. Found reasons to ask questions, to talk. She answered when it mattered, ignored what didn't. Garrett noticed how she worked without looking up much, but he also noticed how she listened. A woman would mention a loose hinge at home. Next day, Garrett would pass by that place with tools in hand. Didn't say why. Didn't say who sent him. Lillian saw it anyway. Duke didn't come back, but his absence didn't feel like peace. It felt like waiting. One evening, Garrett came in later than usual. Mud on his boots, a folded paper in his coat pocket. He set it on the table. "County office," he said. "Filed records." Lillian wiped her hands and sat down. He opened it. A clean document. New. Clear. The old debt. Voided. Officially dismissed. Duke's claim had been rejected. Lillian read it once. Then again. "You did this," she said. Garrett shook his head. "You did." She didn't argue. Just folded the paper back along its crease. Set it aside. The fire popped in the hearth. The house felt settled. For the first time, not like something temporary. Days passed, then weeks. Winter eased its grip. Snow melted along the fence lines, revealing patches of hard ground underneath. One evening, Garrett stood by the porch rail, looking out over the land. Lillian stepped beside him. Didn't ask what he was thinking. Just stood there. After a while, then he spoke. "You can leave if you want," he said. Her head turned slightly. No promise is holding you here anymore. The words didn't rush out. They came slow, like something he'd been carrying a while. Lillian didn't answer right away. The wind moved across the open land, softer now. She looked out at the same stretch he was watching. Then she asked, "Quiet. And you?" Garrett didn't reply. He pushed off the rail, stepped down, and walked toward the side of the house where a small pile of firewood waited to be split. The axe came down once, then again. Steady. Lillian stayed where she was, watching. Not the wood. Him. That night, she took the letter out again. Thomas's letter. The paper worn at the folds now. She'd read it before. More than once, but this time she didn't skim. She slowed down, line by line, until her eyes stopped on something she hadn't really held onto before. Not fully. She won't need saving. She'll need someone who won't stand in her way. Lillian let the words sit. Then she read them again. Something shifted. Not new, just clearer. She folded the letter carefully, set it back in the small wooden box, closed the lid. Morning came quiet. Garrett was already outside, horse saddled, not packed for a long ride, just ready. Lillian stepped onto the porch. She carried a small bag, not large, just enough for a few things. She walked down the steps, stopped near the wagon, set the bag on the ground. Garrett turned when he heard her. Didn't say anything. Didn't ask. She looked at him. Really looked this time. Not as a stranger. Not as an obligation. "I didn't stay because of him," she said. Her voice didn't shake. "I stayed because of you." Garrett didn't move. For a long second, he just stood there. The wind lifted a bit of dust across the yard. He nodded. Once. Slow. That was all. No step forward. No reaching out. Just that. They stood there a moment longer. Then Lillian picked up the bag, carried it back toward the house. Didn't wait for him. Didn't need to. Garrett followed a few steps behind. Not close. Not far. The door opened. Light fell across the floor inside. For the first time, neither of them paused at the threshold. They stepped in, not one after the other, together. And the door closed softly behind them. The wind moved gently across the land that evening, not the kind that cuts, but the kind that carries something softer, like a memory that no longer hurts the way it used to. Inside that house, nothing looked different at first glance. Same table, same worn boards beneath their boots, same quiet. But it wasn't the silence of strangers anymore. It was the kind that holds two people who no longer need to explain themselves. Garrett had once believed a man could live his whole life keeping his distance, doing what needed to be done, asking nothing more. And Lillian, she had learned to stand alone so well, she almost forgot what it meant to let someone stand beside her. But somewhere between a promise made in the cold and a door opened in a storm, they didn't save each other. They simply didn't walk away. And maybe that's what real love looks like out here. Not loud, not rushed, just two people, scarred in their own ways, choosing, quietly, stubbornly, to stay. So if you found yourself in their place, would you have left when you were finally free, or stayed when it finally meant something? If this story stayed with you, there are more waiting just beyond the next horizon. Stories about people who thought they were too broken, too late, or too far gone, until they weren't.